On June 4, 1960, 4 teenagers set up camp along the shores of Lake Bodom in southern Finland. It was the height of summer, so close to the Arctic Circle that the sun never fully sets, a phenomenon known as the midnight sun. Under that warm twilight glow, the group pitched a single canvas tent right by the water, screened from the outside world by the trees. 9 hours later, that tent had been slashed to ribbons. 3 of the teenagers were dead, bludgeoned and stabbed through the fabric. The fourth, an 18-year-old named Niels Gustafsson, was found lying on top of the collapsed canvas. He was barely alive, his jaw broken and his skull severely fractured. This brutal collision of a picture-perfect getaway and a horrific homicide immediately gripped the entire nation. The violence was so extreme, and the setting so peaceful, that the public demanded immediate answers and swift justice. Within an hour of a local civilian calling in the gruesome discovery, police swarmed the campsite. But in the rush to respond to the tragedy, the authorities failed to do the single most important thing at any major crime scene. They didn't set up a proper perimeter. As word spread throughout the morning, a crowd of morbidly curious onlookers gathered. Because there were no barricades or officers holding them back, bystanders wandered freely through the blood-stained woods. They trampled the soft ground, kicked debris, and completely contaminated the site. Investigators rely on a strict chain of custody, a documented timeline showing exactly who handled a piece of evidence from the moment it was found. Without it, you cannot prove where an item came from or if it was tampered with. By allowing a crowd to walk directly through the victim's campsite, the police destroyed the integrity of any physical clues before the investigation even started. The physical truth of what happened was permanently erased by police negligence on day 1. In its place, a massive investigative vacuum opened up, one that would spend the next 60 years pulling in rumors, false confessions, and endless dead ends. Detectives were forced to work with the few items that hadn't been trampled into the mud. The tent itself had been ransacked, and the boys' wallets, watches, and motorcycle keys were gone. But the most confusing artifact was a pair of blood-soaked shoes belonging to Niels, found half buried in the undergrowth a full kilometer away from the campsite. With the physical grounds destroyed, detectives had to rely on human memory. After being discharged from the hospital, Niels was hypnotized by the police to try and jog his fractured memory. While under hypnosis, he described a tall, blonde man with a square jaw attacking the tent, leading to a police sketch that would haunt the case for decades. Just days after the murders, a 36-year-old German expatriate named Hans Osman walked into a nearby surgical hospital acting highly distressed. His shirt was stained red. He claimed it was paint, and because the crime scene was hopelessly compromised, the police had no pristine forensic baseline to justify holding him. Osman's clothing was never tested. Then there was Carl Gillstrom, a local kiosk owner who openly hated campers. He was known to throw rocks at visitors and even cut the cords of tents in the night. Years later, he drunkenly confessed to a neighbor that he committed the murders. But the total lack of physical evidence meant police had nothing to build a case on, making it impossible to prosecute him, even after his own wife admitted she had lied about his alibi. A compromised crime scene creates a unique kind of failure. It lets the guilty slip away, while simultaneously making it impossible to definitively clear the innocent, casting a permanent shadow of doubt over every suspect. It took 45 years for a genuine break in the case. By 2004, forensic science had advanced far beyond the capabilities of the 1960s. Armed with modern DNA profiling techniques, investigators re-examined the surviving physical artifacts. Looking at these specific DNA sequencing graphs, the data yielded an impossible result. The blood soaking those shoes belonged entirely to the 3 murdered teenagers. Not a single drop belonged to Niels. Prosecutors drew a startling conclusion. The killer must have been wearing Niels' shoes during the attack. In 2005, the state put the sole survivor on trial for murder. They argued that Niels flew into a violent rage, killed his friends, staged a robbery, walked his shoes into the woods, and posed as a victim. The evolution of forensic science has a strange way of weaponizing old evidence. Almost half a century later, the very bloodstains meant to find an outside killer had turned the only survivor of the tragedy into its supposed mastermind. Neil's defense attorneys didn't try to explain away the blood on the shoes. Instead, they turned the prosecution's entire narrative back on the botched 1960 investigation. Because the scene was never properly documented or protected, they argued, the prosecution's timeline was entirely speculative. The strongest counter-argument was written on Neil's own body. When police found him that morning, he was found with a shattered jaw, one eye swollen shut, and multiple fractures across his skull. The defense pointed out the sheer physical impossibility of the state's story. A young man suffering from traumatic brain injuries and a shattered mandible could not have meticulously staged a sprawling crime scene, disposed of evidence, and walked half a mile away and back. The jury agreed. Nils was completely acquitted and received a massive payout from the Finnish government for wrongful imprisonment. Because the original responding officers failed to protect the scene, no modern theory, no matter how scientifically backed, could ever overcome the burden of reasonable doubt. Today, the Lake Bodom murders remain one of the most chilling cold cases in European history. The primary suspects are long dead, the survivor has been definitively cleared, and the physical evidence is useless. The true killer didn't execute a mastermind, perfect crime in the dark of night. Instead, the very authorities sworn to solve the crime accidentally provided an impenetrable cover, simply by failing to follow the most basic rule of forensic preservation.